I'll never forget the day it all started. My niece, Katie, just 15 years old, walked up to the neighborhood pool in her one-piece swimsuit. Nothing flashy, nothing you wouldn't see at any public swim meet. She was barefoot, clutching her towel like most kids do, ready to dive in, and then this guy, this so-called officer of our HOA, steps in front of her with his chest puffed out like he's guarding Fort Knox. He says loud enough for everyone by the diving board to hear, "You can't come in unless you cover up, community rules." And the laughter from the kids died instantly, because his tone wasn't playful. It was smug, like he enjoyed embarrassing her. I could see Katie's face, that mix of confusion and fear, the way a kid's eyes dart around when they don't know if they're in trouble or just being picked on. I stepped forward and said, "I'm her guardian, and unless you're actual law enforcement, you don't get to bark orders at a child." He smirked this greasy little smile and told me, "Compliance is enforceable in this district. If you got a problem, take it up with the board." I leaned in and said, "I don't take things up with boards. I take them up with courtrooms." For the first time, his grin cracked just enough to show I'd hit a nerve. And then, almost anticlimactically, he stepped aside and let her through. But here's the thing. Katie didn't swim. She wrapped that towel around herself like a bandage, walked straight back out, and when we got home she locked herself in the shower. That towel was still trembling in her hands like it was holding her together. I sat on the porch swing later, the one my sister painted before she passed, and Katie came out with her hair wet and her eyes red. She whispered. He made me stand there while he yelled about modesty. He told the lifeguard to watch me until I changed. You could tell, something in her broke. That pool wasn't just a pool, it was where her mom had taught her swim, where we held her last birthday barbecue, and now it was tainted. And in her silence, I knew I wasn't just fighting for a towel and a rule. I was fighting for her dignity. The next morning, a glossy envelope landed in my mailbox. The HOA fined me $500 for disruptive behavior at a shared amenity and failure to enforce the dress code on a minor. No mention of their so-called officer's behavior, just a bold little bill daring me to shut up. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because they thought this was strategy. I'd been in enough courtrooms to recognize a preemptive strike. They wanted the official record to say I was the problem before I even opened my mouth. That's when the gloves came off. I started calling neighbors. The ones I knew would tell me the truth if I asked the right way. And boy, the stories poured in. One teenage boy benched for wearing a swim shirt with a slogan. A girl sent home because her straps were too thin. Another kid humiliated because this same officer told him to pull up his swim trunks like a gentleman. Every parent used the same words: strict, creepy, too much. But none of them had filed a complaint. Fear does that. It convinces you silence is safer. But silence was exactly what the HOA was banking on, and I wasn't going to give it to them. I dug deeper and found the thread. Turns out the HOA hadn't hired a legitimate security firm at all. They'd contracted a shell company owned by the board president's cousin. That's right, a fake outfit with a fancy name, no licenses, no credentials, and a guy with a badge he probably ordered online. And this was who they sent to police children. Then came my unexpected ally, Marta, the HOA treasurer. She was a mom herself, quiet at meetings, never confrontational. But one afternoon, she pulled me aside outside Katie's school. Her blouse was crisp, but her eyes looked tired, guilty almost. She said, "I didn't vote for that dress code. I didn't agree with it, but I didn't stop it either. And when I saw your niece standing there in that towel, it felt like complicity." Then she handed me a folded agenda with a line highlighted in pink. Security should address teen dress code breaches on site immediately. Physical relocation may be used if needed. She didn't write it, she said, but she didn't delete it either. And then she whispered, "I have a daughter too. She's 13. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just me against the HOA. Cracked for showing from the inside. Of course, the board retaliated. More fines, vague accusations about failure to respect authority. They even parked another uniformed officer across from my driveway. Arms folded, no clipboard, no notes, just standing there like a scarecrow meant to intimidate me. But intimidation only works if you're afraid, and by then I was past fear. I was angry, and anger could be useful if you know where to aim it. So I filed a request under state law for all their security contracts. And sure enough, the smoking gun appeared. No licenses, no insurance, just Colleen, the board president, funneling money to her cousin's fake company. That wasn't just negligence, that was fraud. I called in a favor from a former colleague of the State Department of Oversight, and suddenly this wasn't just a neighborly spat, it was a regulatory investigation. But before the state could move, I knew I had to get the community on record. So I rented out the town hall outside the gates, neutral ground. I sent quiet invitations, nothing dramatic, just informational session regarding HOA procedural oversight and child safety. When the night came, a few dozen neighbors filled the room. Some looked nervous, some looked fed up, but all of them were ready to listen. I stood at the front with a binder, no microphone, no slideshow, just paper and truth. I walked them through everything, dates, fines, contracts, the fake security company, the retaliation. I didn't dramatize it. The facts did the work. And then I said, you may think this only matters to my niece, but when the HOA hires unlicensed guards, intimidates kids, and retaliates through fines, every one of your homes becomes a liability. That's when faces changed. Because when you talk about property values and lawsuits, even the quiet ones perk up. One mom stood and said her daughter had quit swimming last summer without explaining why. An older man admitted his grandson had been humiliated for sagging basketball shorts. And then Marta, God bless her, raised her hand and said, I was part of the board. I saw the directives. I didn't stop them, and I regret it. That was the breaking point. Neighbors started connecting dots, realizing the weight they'd been carrying under the guise of community rules. The very next morning, regulators showed up in unmarked sedans, badges flashing. They rolled out file cabinets into the sunlight, spread papers on folding tables, and it felt like watching a dam crack open. Colleen, our queen bee president, strutted up in her pearl SUV, heels clicking, sunglasses sharp enough to cut glass. But when an investigator stopped her at the door with a clipboard, you could see it in her posture. Her empire was slipping. And then Marta stepped forward, documents in hand, originals of everything she'd given me. She laid them on the table without hesitation. That was the nail in the coffin. By noon, the fake officer had been handed a sealed envelope, termination notice, and walked off without a word. The board president was removed pending review, and the shell company was barred from operating in the state. Just like that, the structure that had loomed over our neighborhood like a second government collapsed. And here's the part that stuck with me. A week later, Katie and I walked back to that pool. The sign on the gate had changed. No more closed for maintenance. Now it read, Welcome, Discrimination-Free Zone. Kids were splashing again, a dad reading on the bench like nothing had ever happened. Katie didn't dive in right away. She sat on the edge, dipped her toes, and just let herself breathe. Then she turned and gave me the smallest smile, the kind that says, we made it. That night, she handed me a drawing she'd been working on. It was the pool pavilion, but different. Bright, no shadows, a folded towel on the steps, and a girl mid-dive, suspended in air, free. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. I framed it and put on the porch by the swing. Now, our neighborhood isn't perfect, but change started moving like roots, quiet, steady, inevitable. Parents who never showed up before are running for the board. Fines are being challenged. And Marta, the treasurer who once stayed silent, started a mentorship group for teens. Katie and her daughter are inseparable now, walking home from the pool like nothing ever scarred them. But I know better. Something did scar them, and it taught us all what silence costs. So here's where I leave it to you. Was I right to push this hard, to put Katie's name on a complaint, to drag our neighborhood through the mud for the sake of a principle? Or should I have just let it go, told her to wear a cover-up, and kept the peace? Because that's the thing about community. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. And I'd love to know where you stand. Drop a comment, tell me what you would have done, and if you've ever had to take on your HOA or any authority, share your story. You're not alone, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear.